The best place to start learning about Dragon Warrior monsters is by learning about the history and the release dates of each game. So let's get started with the original Dragon Warrior monsters. This was, of course, made in 1998, 2 years after the success of Pokemon, but this is much more in depth, especially with its breeding system, and has way more than 150 monsters. Of course, Dragon Quest has already had to some capacity the monster catching in its games, Dragon Quest V and VI, but this is their first game dedicated to the capture of these monsters. This game ended up working out pretty well, which is why they made the sequel Dragon Warrior Monsters 2. But at this point, up to Dragon Quest VII had been released, and as such, more monsters were added into the game, along with a few other differences. They also decided to split this game, similar to, once again, Pokemon games, into two different versions, that being Kobe's Adventure and Tara's Adventure. And although they have some small differences, they are incredibly similar. After that, they decided to remake both of those games in 2002 for the PlayStation. And this is, of course, a Japan exclusive. We won't be talking too much about that. In 2003, another Japan exclusive was released, that being Caravan Heart. This was, of course, the last game Enix made before merging with Square to form the nowadays Square Enix. After that, they waited until 2006 before releasing the game Dragon Quest Monsters Joker for the DS. This is, of course, the first game in the series to have 3D models, which did not come at a price whatsoever. This was, of course, also a success, so they made another one in 2010, that being Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2. And that one was also released in North America, along with the original Dragon Quest Monsters Joker, and also had 3D models, and was also for the Nintendo DS. They also, at that 2010, the same year where they released that, they released an exclusive mobile game in Japan called Dragon Quest Monsters Wanted. At 2012, they remade the first Dragon Warrior Monsters game, but it's still Japan exclusive. And then they did a similar thing for the second games, Dragon Warrior Monsters 2, in 2013. 2014, they made another mobile game, also still in Japan, called Dragon Quest Monsters Super Light. And then 2016, they made the sequel to Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2, Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3, and then kept it a Japan exclusive. 2018, they made Terry's Wonderland SP, also a Japan exclusive. In 2019, Terry's Wonderland Retro was also a Japan exclusive. It wasn't until 2023 when they released Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince that we got another Dragon Warrior Monsters game here in America, and I'm assuming in other places of the world. Now, of course, I've talked about Pokemon, but these games are incredibly different than Pokemon and should not be confused with a ripoff of Pokemon. One of the big differences is, of course, the battle system. While instead of the single combat that Pokemon has, with exceptions, of course, Dragon Warrior Monsters generally has your entire team facing up against your opponent's entire team. There are, of course, a few exceptions. Another big difference is the breeding system. In Pokemon, you just catch all the Pokemon that you're able to obtain and you evolve them. There is, of course, no evolution in the Dragon Warrior Monsters series. Instead, it features a breeding/synthesis feature, where you're able to fuse or breed any two monsters to get their offspring or fusion. This, of course, allows a much more wider breadth of obtainability in these monsters versus something like Pokemon. The way you obtain these monsters is also incredibly different. While in Pokemon you might throw a Pokeball, in these games instead you would throw a piece of meat, in the early games at least, and use that in order to increase a unknown friendship value in the monster. If you got lucky and had a high enough friendship value on the monster, you would be able to befriend that monster at the end of the battle. This, of course, did not apply to some bosses. Of course, this didn't also stick around either, as they decided to try and mix it up by the time they got to Caravan Heart, but that's a Japan exclusive, so I won't be going too much into that. They did change it up almost entirely, however, by the time they got to Dragon Quest Monsters Joker, where they changed it to a system where instead of throwing meat, you have to use a special skill where you'll show your monster's strength in order to impress the monster. that you're trying to befriend. If they're impressed, they will join your party and immediately end the battle. Although this is much more efficient for ending battles without battling, it of course also has its downfalls, as failure to capture the monster can enrage them, preventing future attempts at trying to befriend them, and resulting in the enemies having a higher tension for that battle. I'm fairly sure they kept this the same in Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2, but I can't speak for Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3. By the time the Dark Prince rolled around, they decided to take the best of both worlds, where you can use meat to increase that initial meter that would be increased by the show of strength. And by keeping that, they were able to create a delicate balance that makes it easy to befriend monsters in that game. One of the key selling points of this game is, of course, being able to play with this giant cast of Dragon Quest monsters, hence the name Dragon Quest Monsters. These are, of course, all sorts of memorable and adorable. You have ones that are so well known as the Slime, to even the final bosses of some of these games like Dragon Lord. I'm sorry if I spoiled Dragon Quest 1 for anybody there. Anyway, that's the end of this video. If I got anything wrong, let me know in the comments, etc., etc. Have a nice day.